everybody, it's Brian Asbury, and I just wanted to welcome you to today's episode. If you could, like today's episode, hit that subscribe button, and let's continue to grow the developmentally speaking brand. Today, my guest is world traveled professional wrestler. I don't think there's been a place that he hasn't worked or been seen. Ladies and gentlemen, Colt Cabana. Colt, how's it going?
Good. How are you? I haven't been to Israel, and I was supposed to go this week, next month, and the show got canceled. It was going to be my debut after 25 years. So Israel is one place I haven't been. But thanks for having me.
No problem. I'm sure it will happen eventually. You're a busy man. You're all over the place, it seems like. Oh, always been all over the place.
Yeah, it's kind of slowed down as I head into my 40s and my twilight of my professional wrestling career. But I'd say for 20 years it was nonstop, and then a global pandemic and a contract with AEW changed that a bit. But you can still see me on the scene, of course. I'll still take those bookings.
So, what made you want to get into professional wrestling? And I'm sure you've been asked this millions of times.
First saw it. My father was watching it. He was a casual watcher of pro wrestling. I became a diehard, and I was just of the era of I loved sport and I loved characters. I loved the Cubs and I loved Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and He-Man and I also loved American Gladiators and I loved Bloodsport and I loved tournaments and I loved registered fighting. So pro wrestling was just the ultimate. It was just the ultimate combination of all of that, and then. I was always good at sport, and I was always a bit of a ham. So it just spoke to me, and I wasn't good enough to get in the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball. So, but I did. When I was in junior high school, I was reading the Pro Wrestling Torch, and looking at PWIs every week, and figuring out the internet as it started, and getting a grasp on what wrestling was. And when I learned it was more than WWF, there was territories, that Danny Davis and those guys were doing. I realized that's where I would probably fit in.
Mm-hmm. So at what point did you decide that professional wrestling was something you were going to pursue? At what age?
I would say junior high school, when I started reading the dirt sheets and stuff, and I saw it was realistic that again, that I didn't have to wrestle in arenas. I didn't think I never thought I would become the size of a Hulk Hogan, so that just didn't seem realistic. But once you would see the results where it was this group ran, tri-state wrestling in front of 200 people, and I was like, oh, I could do that. And then you see a picture of Ace Darling. It's like, oh, that looks a little more realistic.
So where did you start training at?
I started training in Chicago at a place called the Steel Domain, just a local place. My parents said you had to go to college, and so I went to college, and because I had to go to college, this is pretty storied, but I played college football because I wanted to start wrestling, but they were like, you can't, you have to go to college. And so after a year of college football, I was just like, I really want to wrestle so bad. And so my parents were like, okay, as long as you stay in school, and then I found a school in Chicago, the Steel Domain, and I trained during the summer, and I assumed I would go back to school my sophomore year and then train in between my sophomore and junior year and continue my training. But at the end of the summer, they were putting me on shows, and I was, putting up the ring, and so I would just continue training and wrestling while going to college for the next 3 years.
So during that time, did you just wrestle for them, or when did you start, expanding out? Was it just the Chicagoland area you started out in?
Well, Steel Domain didn't really have a promotion, so the first guy was a promoter named Rockin' Randy Ricci, who was actually a wrestler, and he did a bunch of enhancement matches called under Jumpin' Jerry Fox in the WWF in the early '90s, mid '90s, and he was using the ring that was at the Steel Domain, and they were like, hey, we need somebody to help with the ring. And of course I jumped in, and then they were like, we need a wrestler. And I asked my trainers, am I ready? They're like, well, a basic match you could do. And so that was called the NAWF, and he was running kind of Wisconsin at the time. My first match was in Whitewater, Wisconsin at Whitewater. Was it Whitewater? No, it was it was somewhere else. It was Fort Atkinson, Wisconsin. It was called Fort Fest. It was a little a tiny little festival that was
Mm-hmm.
happening in front of probably 300 people just around a little grassy knoll
Huh.
in Wisconsin. And so I started doing like little shows for him around Wisconsin, and then um, our trainers in Steel Domain, they were doing shows in Minnesota, so they would bring some of their students, and then I was going to school at Western Michigan University, so I would try to get some work in Michigan, and I would be like, hey, I'm a trained wrestler, so I started getting some doing some work up there, and that's like when I would do shows with Jimmy Jacobs, and he was probably 15 or 16
Mm-hmm.
at the time, maybe even less, maybe 14. And so I just started wrestling, and then through that you just start networking, and then the big one for me was probably IWA Mid South, where I was able to get into there, and through there, Ian Rotten, first of all, was a bigger name at the time with ECW, but he would bring in a lot of people would see Ian Rotten and see, remember ECW, and they would want to work there, and Ian Rotten he wouldn't let anybody wrestle there, but he loved the idea of letting young wrestlers wrestle
Mm-hmm.
there because he didn't have to pay them that much, and they they were all hungry, and so he would give everybody a shot, for the most part. And I know that'll probably play in to some OVW talk here in a second, but wrestling for IW Mid South. So, but through that probably was where we got real good connections, because he was bringing in a lot of names, and
Mm-hmm.
a lot of names trusted him because he was a name himself. So just thinking about just the idea of, like, I remember, I became buddies with Nova there, and then Nova later would become my boss, while in OVW with WWE. And so, I mean, but Nova was just one of probably hundreds, and then,
Mm-hmm.
it just kind of spread. So while in college, it just, it spread. I was hungry. I was training. I looked decent. I loved wrestling, and I was getting better, and people were booking me.
So did you go to IWA before you went to Ring of Honor? Is that what led in to Ring of Honor,
Yeah,
or
for
okay?
sure. I think IWA led to going overseas before Ring of Honor. So the tape trading community at that time, the early 2000s, had become so prominent that Alex Shane from FWA over in the UK had reached out, and strictly through going down to Kentucky a couple times a month and wrestling in a barn,
Mm-hmm.
I was being flown to England, which I thought was amazing. And it's to this day that I think the power of the internet is so wonderful, and a lot of
Mm-hmm.
people shit on it, but it's just like the internet got me to England. It's crazy at 22 years old or whatever it was. And so, yeah, so the buzz had come, I think, through the IW Mid South tapes to get uh, to be able to start with Ring of Honor.
Mm-hmm. So how was those early days of Ring of Honor? Because I worked with Gabe a little bit when Dragon Gate USA launched, so that was way after. But Ring of
Yeah,
Honor was always something everybody talked about.
yeah, and I was at a point where I was young and Gabe was young, and a lot of the wrestlers were young. And Gabe, I think later in Gabe's career, he had established this idea that he had started Ring of Honor that was a huge success, maybe not financially, but recognition wise.
Mm.
And so, maybe Gabe was a little more stern in his ways, in the Dragon Gate USA and the Evolve days. But for my days, um, he was just he was like hungry and
Mm-hmm.
young, and also was learning too. Like, we were all a part of this thing that was just like, let's try to figure this out. And he had been around ECW, and we had all been around stuff, and so we were all growing this thing together. So I loved collaborating with Gabe, working with Gabe. I would give him my ideas, he would give me his ideas. We would come together, we would work together, and I always thought that made for the best
Mm-hmm.
product. And I always looked fondly upon those early years of Ring of Honor, whether it was working, or wrestling against Nigel and Homicide, and just some of those matches. Even I'm thinking back to like this match in Dayton I had with Spanky, which was so
Mm-hmm.
fun, and just so many great memories and so many great matches. And yeah, it was it was the start of um our classes revolution. Like now you see so many of us in prominent places in wrestling,
Mm-hmm.
and it's we knew it as it was happening. As we're all in our mid-20s, we were like, oh, we'll be the future of wrestling. Who else would be the future of wrestling?
So how long were you in Ring of Honor before WWE started? Like, how did your development? Did they reach out to you? Were they watching Ring of Honor?
It was just like, I don't know, maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I don't think like Johnny Ace was necessarily sitting there watching tapes. I think he had more to do. But as I got on here, I mean, here's the thing: is like, I was 27 when I signed with WWE, so I had been wrestling a long time,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I reported to OVW May. My birthday is May 6th, so I reported like end of May 2007. So I would have just turned 27, and
Mm-hmm.
so at that point I'd almost been around for 10 years, and I was wrestling on shows with everyone. So a lot of the WWE roster at that point were my friends and
Mm-hmm.
people that I had wrestled with, and also people that kind of like stepped over me in the progression, if that makes sense. Like I was doing really well, but they got signed and went to WWE, and maybe they weren't doing as well as me or notoriety as well as me in on the independent scene. Um, and so I had gained this like kind of status on the independents at that time as one of the upper echelon wrestlers, and so I was just wrestling and wrestling, and then at one point I kept on doing enhancement
Mm-hmm.
matches. And I remember I did a match with Eugene. It was on Sunday Night Heat. I remember I thought I was just working, but I knew how to work. I knew how to wrestle. And Jimmy Yang came back. He was doing Jimmy Wang Yang, I believe, or maybe Akio at the time. But he came back to me. He's like, "You had to have gotten signed from that, right?" And I was like, I don't even think they said hi to me. And I remember him being blown away because it was like right up my alley doing a Eugene match too. And
Mm-hmm.
years later, you would see, right? So um, I just kept doing matches, and then it got to a point where like people were picking me to wrestle them. I remember Trevor Murdoch was supposed to wrestle someone else, and he went to Sergeant Slaughter, and he got the match changed for me to work Trevor. And I kept going and going, and I was touring England. I was touring Puerto Rico. I was touring Japan. Steve Corino had got me over to Japan. I had done Wrestling Society X. I was really doing it. I was making a living. I was making a really good living too. And it got to the point where Davari had gotten a really good position in WWE. Um, and he just went to Johnny Ace. He's like, "Why aren't you hiring Colt?" And uh, you know, like there's some people who are afraid to go up to
Mm-hmm.
people and ask for their friends. And Davari is the complete opposite of that. He's always been so generous with it, maybe to a fault, where I didn't even ask him, but he was like, "You got to be signed here. Like, what the heck?"
Mm-hmm.
And so he got me. So WWE was in Detroit that year, and ROH was in Detroit, and WWE had a WWF had a, or WWE had a private room in the hotel where they had a wrestling ring set up, and I was to do a private tryout for Johnny Ace in the ring, and Johnny Ace never made it, and so I just sat there all day, and then I was at the bar at night, and Johnny Ace was at the bar at the hotel bar. I was hanging out, and Johnny Ace just took me aside and said, "You want to work here?" I said, "Yes, please." He said, "All right, we'll set it up. I'll call Nova." And he goes, "I can't give you the minimum, but this is what I can give you." And
Mm-hmm.
I assumed I would get the minimum, so I was glad that or he said, "I can't give you a lot, but I won't give you the minimum."
Mm-hmm.
So he didn't give me the minimum, so that was nice. And I did. I took a huge pay cut. I probably took a 50% pay cut of what I was making on the independent scene to go wrestle for WWE, but I thought it was a great investment in my future to becoming a millionaire with WWE. And so I took it. I said, "Gabe, is that okay?" And Gabe was ecstatic, and Kerry Silken was ecstatic, and everyone was so happy for me. Just remember at that time with Ring of Honor, I had been there many years. I just finished my feud with Homicide. It was kind of like, not that there wasn't anything else for me to do because the Briscoes wrestled there for 20 years, but
Mm-hmm.
like it was kind of it would be fine for me to take a break from Ring of Honor to
Mm-hmm.
make me fresh. And I'm such a pessimist that like I kind of assumed like I don't know how long I'll be in WWE just because I don't look like Batista or any of these guys. I'm an
Mm-hmm.
indie guy, and they were frowning on indie guys at that time. But I'll be gone a little bit. I'll be able to get fresh for the independents if I come back, and while I'm doing that, I'll make a paycheck, and I'll also be able to learn with like and just be around
Mm-hmm.
all these wrestlers in this wrestling situation while I'm in developmental.
See, like Gabe was ecstatic. I remember, like in Dragon Gate and Evolve, that would be one of the things that he would tell him. Sign with us, but if WWE comes knocking, we'll let you out. We want the best for you, and not a lot of people are like that. I feel.
Well, he's a realist, right? And you
Mm-hmm.
got to be a realist. That, and I would always say is like because they were before. I wasn't really around for this contract for these like minimal contract things,
Mm-hmm.
which I don't really agree upon. But I understand that you're trying to build something. But
Mm-hmm.
I was always like, you're not even paying me the wage, of a janitor. And I was like, a janitor makes so much more money than we do under these contracts. So like, I was just like, you can't.
Mm-hmm.
I'll wrestle here, but I'm not going to be I'm not going to sign an exclusive
Yeah.
contract or anything. But I understand when those started coming around.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I'm glad that was in writing, that they would be realistic,
Mm-hmm.
that hey, like this, you know an Evolve or a Dragon Gate USA isn't a company right now that's making millions of dollars, and we all know that there's only a couple of places that
Mm-hmm.
potential is there.
Mm-hmm. So, what was your early impressions of OVW?
Well, I had a choice. I had a choice to go to either OVW or what was it in McDonough, Georgia,
Deep South.
Deep South, and I remember Nova assumed I would want to go to Deep South because I had some friends there, but I was like, no, I'd like to go to OVW. I would like to, it's a 5-hour drive from me, and I had done that drive a lot. So if ever I need to get home, it was just a car's drive away, and so I drove down there. I got a $2,000 signing bonus to move everything, and I just put a bunch of shit in my car, and I probably spent $50 on gas, and I pocketed the 1950, and I considered that my signing bonus. And let's see, I actually stayed on Matt Capitelli's. Matt Capitelli had a room for me, and then I realized that wasn't the right situation, so I moved in with one of the wrestlers. And at that point, I really didn't have much.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at that, right as I was moving in, Jack Swagger was moving down to Florida. He gave me his. He had like this big chair. That's what I slept in for a while, and then Wade Barrett moved down to Florida, and he gave me his couch, and then I slept on that couch for a while. Then eventually Mike Mondo of the Spirit Squad moved down to Florida, and then he had a bed, and so then I took his bed. So I had no plan of really setting any roots
Mm-hmm.
down in Louisville. I didn't want to live there. I wanted to go back to Chicago as soon as possible. I didn't want to be like, this is my home.
Mm-hmm.
And so I never made any purchases of anything. I just kind of took from everybody that was giving away as they were leaving. And walking in, it was intimidating, but I knew that like I had been wrestling a long time and at a high level, and so I knew like quote unquote WWE wanted to like change your way, but I was pretty confident in who I was as a wrestler. I didn't think I knew everything, but I didn't think I was a first day trainee, and I didn't want to be treated as a first day trainee. And I think they tried to, like, for the first couple of weeks, but the wild thing is like I had a dark match like the first thing, but at that point I had been wrestling in that area for years with IW Mid South, and
Mm-hmm.
so like Donna's in the front row who watched me grow as a wrestler, rest in peace. But like Donna and all these other people who had been watching me for years are now there, um, cheerleading me, and also like letting everybody know like, oh, this guy's good. And I had buzz, so there was some and there was like independent wrestling fans in the arena. So right away, like the fans like took to me,
Mm-hmm.
and that was really helpful. But it's like that didn't happen by magic. I had put in years, and I had put years of going down to that area and getting over.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just a different promotion. But right off the bat, like because I was kind of over a little bit, I kind of got like a little push, and I was off to the races in OVW. So yeah, that was kind of nice.
Did they have any plans for you while you were down there? How long were we down there before they shut it? Before you went to FCW?
I was there like a little less, like 11 months, and then I think I
Mm-hmm.
was in FCW about 8 or 9 months, I think.
So did they ever look down upon you because of who you were beforehand, or did they just work with that?
Maybe or maybe not, but like I think once I showed up and I was like, hey, I'm okay, I'm ready to
Mm-hmm.
listen, I'm ready to wrestle. Like I wasn't that defiant.
Mm-hmm.
I was defiant in some ways, but I also knew to just like sadly, looking back, like sometimes I love the people that were defiant. Were like, what you're saying is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
To some of the coaches, there's an example of like Ricky Morton was like showing us how to do an O'Connor roll, and he kept calling it a sunset flip, and I was like, "That's an O'Connor roll." He's like, "Nope, it's an sunset." I was like, "Pat O'Connor, the O'Connor roll," and like like he's just like basically like, "Colt, you don't know what you're talking about," and it's like where you learn like, all right, I'm just not gonna pick a fight with everybody for everything. Like there's no point. Like I know that's an O'Connor, that's an O'Connor. He may not know it, but he's also Robert. Did I say Ricky Morton? Robert
Mm-hmm.
Gibson, I meant. Robert. I'm not saying Robert Gibson's a freaking legend in this business, and he just
Mm-hmm.
said the wrong thing. But those are the kind of like little misinformations that can go on. So I learned just like shut your mouth, collect your check, learn wrestle in
Mm-hmm.
front of people, pray that like for some reason they want a chubby Jewish guy, like they're touring Israel or something. The same way. Like that was my bit of hope. It was like we saw that Santino Marella, they were going to Italy and needed a guy who spoke Italian, and that was him. And I was just like, I'm praying they do a tour of Israel and they need a Jewish guy. And it didn't happen, but there's so many pitches that I did, and we had weekly things where we would pitch, and the writers and the people would come down sometimes and pluck some guys, and it didn't happen for me in OVW, but it got to the point where I was one of the guys that was like, I don't know, one of the stars, I guess.
So what was the main difference between OVW and FCW?
Well, remember this was 13 years ago or something like that. So, I think the main difference was like OVW had a built-in thing. It had a built-in history, and FCW and Kern and Dusty tried to like be like, we also have a built-in with Florida Championship Wrestling from Florida, but the reality was they were just starting a promotion from fresh, from the ground up, and OVW had history, and we had towns that were built in, and we had there was people like like Flash Flanagan and all these guys from the years of before me, before it was even developmental, the Bashams or whatever that were there, and so Damaja, but so I think that was the main difference, is they really had something already built in, and so when we went to FCW, it was like they were starting, they had to start building a process, and that's not easy, and so it was hard for a lot of people when we went to FCW, because like luckily we got shows right away every Tuesday on at Bourbon Street in Newport Richie, I believe, and so that was a weekly show, and then they just started and then we had a weekly show at the arena, and then they but FCW was open about 6 months before we got there, and at that point we would ask them the stories, and they'd be just like, we just show up to practice, wrestle for a couple hours, and go home. And it was like, oh my god, it sounds miserable.
Did you pitch anything while you were down in FCW for what you wanted to do? Or
I pitched so much stuff. That's a whole podcast in itself. I have a thing on my computer. I remember I was pitching this idea for like a reality show. This was 2008. I remember the thing, like my headline was, for some reason I love John and Kate plus 8. I don't know why, but I can't stop watching it. And I had pitched this idea of like a reality show building to me getting to SmackDown, like based off, not even a reality show, but like a reality show segments or whatever. I'd also pitched doing like I think it was like an E Wild on, or no, it was based off of Dave Attell's Insomniac, if you remember that show on Comedy Central. And it was like what we do in each town. So I was like, what I would do I would come to so if SmackDown was taping on a Thursday or whatever, I would come to the town Wednesday night, we'd go out, we'd like find fun places and things to do, we would tape it, and then we would make that into a 1-minute segment that you would then play as my intro, like my intro's Tron, like my music, you know what I'm saying? And like, I mean, I was full of these super creative ideas, and at that time, like, I still believe I'm in touch with pop culture and society, and it's like, in 2008, I was right there, I was in it, and I remember, I think what got me up to SmackDown is we had this day where it was like a Monday, Tuesday. Vince McMahon was going to be there Monday. He was going to watch everyone do promos. Like, Vince never came to Florida. And on Tuesday, the other writers from every other show would watch us do promos. And I remember Dusty only chose like his favorites, and so I was ready to go up and on Monday, and I wasn't one of them. And at this point, I was one who had been there the longest, but I could tell at that point they were like, this guy, we need to show DJ Gabriel. Look how great his body is. And that's when DJ Gabriel got brought up, right? Steve Lewington from OVW, but it wasn't like Colt's a great wrestler. It's just like, he is a great wrestler, but he's not what Vince is looking for. He's not six, it was the same, that Alicia Fox, from that one, Alicia Fox got called up, DJ Gabriel got called up, Rosa Mendez got called up, and I believe Sheamus got called up. Like, those were the ones where like FCW was presenting the next stars, not the Scotty Goldmans of the world. And I remember getting in line, and Dusty was like, "Get the fuck out of line." and I was like, "No, man. Like, this is, you hear these stories of people being like, this is where you got to take it, And I was like, this is weird. I'm going to take it. I'm going to do this promo, even though I wasn't asked to. And eventually, he was like, "Don't fucking embarrass me." And I was like, "All right." So I kind of gave up. The next day, in front of like Brian Gewirtz and Michael Hayes and all of these guys. I cut this promo about how the Jewish entertainer was such a huge thing, and I talked about at that time Andy Samberg and Adam Sandler and even Seinfeld and Jonah Hill. I was like, like it's not like these are the cool guys in Hollywood. These are the entertainers, the Jewish entertainers. Like I'm gonna be your sports entertainer, your Jewish sports entertainer, Seth Rogen, these guys. And I think like they saw like my passion, my understanding, and my creativity, and and I didn't necessarily come with a big push, but it was enough to be like, okay, this guy is obviously skilled enough. Let's move him from here to there. But at that point, they moved me, they moved Kizarny, they moved Gavin Spears, they moved Jay Braddock, they moved Ortiz. What was his name? Atlas to Bone guy with the rally towel. It was just they put up 9 of us up at the same time, and that's when you're super gonna sink. Hayden Vanson didn't even get to wrestle. He did a promo on the Undertaker, and then they fired him or whatever. So it was really, and I'm not again, I don't stand out. Like I stand, my brain stands out, my creativity stands out, my personality, but can't look at me and be like, there he is, the future of wrestling. So in that instance, it was just the worst case scenario. But that was the one pitch was, I guess, the Jewish entertainer that got me up. But over the years, OVW, FCW, there's one on YouTube where it was me. We had pitched the Jablonskis or the Pulaskis, yeah, and I had hitched my wheel. I saw that Beth Phoenix was about to, or like in WWE, but she's coming down to OVW, and they weren't doing much with her. And I knew that Roadkill looked cool, and I knew Chet the Jet was jacked, and I was like, oh, this is where I would like squeeze in. And so I was like, listen, let me be like the fast talking Chicago Polish guy. And I'm Polish and Russian, so, and I come from Chicago, where Polish, we're the second. I think they say besides Warsaw, Chicago has the most Polish people in it, and so we started cutting these promos as the Pulaskis. And then Beth got called up and her gimmick got changed. So me and Roadkill and Chet started, we still kind of did it on promo days, but nothing moved with it. And then they tried me out as Matt Classic. I did a dark match as Matt Classic. That was a gimmick I did in Wrestling Society X. This was in OVW, and I remember Dave Lagana was really pushing for it to get me up there. And then I don't know if this coincides with it, but Charlie Haas started doing something very similar. Like maybe even a month later, and then I was pitching for me and Charlie Haas to do a tag team because I saw he was swimming in nothing, and I was like, I always wanted to come from the bottom. Like I never pictured myself, and I remember Dave Lagana once said to me, he's like, you got to stop pitching like these lowbrow ideas. Like one of my big, like Sunday Night Heat was on WWE.com, and that's it. And I was like, I want to be the general manager of Sunday Night Heat, which wasn't even a TV show at the time. I thought that would be very funny. And he's like, you got to stop pitching stuff like this. Please, like, think higher of yourself. I go, okay. And then my next pitch was, I wrote it out. I was like, okay, I debut at WrestleMania. I beat John Cena. The Undertaker comes down. I beat him. And then, and then Batista's like, what the heck? And then I go in and I just beat him up. And I was like, is that what you want? Because I know my place in wrestling. It's not realistic. So I'll pitch that, but it's just stupid. Let me be the Sunday Night Heat general manager, and I'll get over. And then slowly but surely, I'll work my way into the system. But, those were some of my OVW pitches. I had a lot more in FCW too. It's just I was pitching all the time and just praying somebody would read something or pick something up. Oh, my biggest one, I'll tell you my one that I thought would be the most successful was Edge and Foley had just returned, and the Edge heads, and so I knew like Foley didn't want a full-time program, but he was back in it with Edge, and so I had pitched that. A 6-man series of like Edge and the Edge, which was Hawkins and Ryder, versus me, and this was before Kazarny went up. It would be the three faces of Foley. It would be Foley, Mick Foley as Mick, and then me as Dude Love, and then Kazarny as Cactus Jack. And that way, like my whole pitch was like, we'll wrestle the whole matches. They don't have to do anything on house shows. Like we'll put in all the work. They just come in for like the hot tag, and that way, they can. We still present them as the huge stars, but it's like we're their crutches. And I like one of my big. I was always like sad that like I never got that to Mick, and I remember that Edge, Hawkins and Ryder, they pitched it to Edge before they pitched it to the Office, and Edge liked it, so he went to the Office and fought for it. And sometimes like listen, the developmental wrestlers, we pitched everything, everywhere, every time. Like there was so many pitches, and just I would say 99% was not even listened to.
Mm-hmm.
So if that had just gotten in Mick's ear, and I knew Mick, Mick was a friend of mine, I just hadn't put it in his ear yet. And I think like maybe if I'd gotten that in his ear, he would have thought about it. But
Mm-hmm.
it just went dead, and never happened. Golden became alive.
So how long were you on the main roster as Goldman?
So I think I got called up 2000. I think I got called up September of 2008. I was in a couple of matches, and then they kind of stopped bringing me to TV, but I was on the roster.
Mm-hmm.
They stopped bringing me to TV, and then I started doing commentary in FCW. Then they brought me back up to TV in like January of 2009 just to do the same thing. And then February 2009, I had a match versus Umaga. I'll never know what happened. But after they did the match, then they redid the match. It was like a 3-minute squash. They redid it. It was like taped. And I was fired that Friday. So that was September of 2008 to February of 2009. Which was my official quote unquote WWE roster time. But I only had like 5 matches and 2 battle royals. So I'll never know what happened on that. People have tried to tell. Joey Styles was like, "Here's my theory." Tom Pritchard was like, "Here's my theory." But we'll never know. Umaga might know, Kevin Dunn might know, and Vince might know. And if you want to try to get them on your podcast, maybe they'll tell you.
So life after WWE, how's everything been? Because you're still working everywhere.
Yeah,
it seems, except for Israel.
Except for Israel. Listen, I more than proved myself after 2009 when I was fired. I started a podcast, and it really changed my whole life. And I quadrupled, I 10 times what I was making in WWE, over and over. And I lived the life that I wanted to. I had the career that I wanted to, and I literally traveled the world as a star in my circuit, in my niche world. And it was satisfying and gratifying. And AEW was my choice. Like I chose not to sign any more contracts. People had been asking me to do contracts and sign contracts and come on, and I was like, no, like I've got my own machine here. I travel the world. I do my own bookings. Like what Matt Cardona is doing right now is kind of like the same schedule, really. The wild, crazy schedule. I mean, I would wrestle in Florida. The next day I'd be in California. The next day I would be in Texas. And I would find those flights that would get me there in those times. And I would travel those crazy hours, and then I would take 2 days off, and then I'd go to Japan. It's just I did that for 11 years until I signed with AEW, and I just thought it was the right time to kind of like take on that, a contracted, just a weekly gig, and so that's what it is. So, I think you might hear this from a lot of people, is that when we're in developmental, it's really hard, and it can be very depressing and soul crushing, and it's a hard thing to do, and it's a hard place to be. But then when you take the person 10 years out of it, and then to look back on it, it's like you have these fond memories. You have these fond memories of, for me, it's not, especially OVW. It wasn't the management, or not the management. I love Danny Davis, but it wasn't my coaches. For the most part, I despised my coaches. But and for that, that it was so negative while I was there. But then you look back and you look at the camaraderies that I built with the wrestlers. So it was like we were in war, we were in the army, and so like I built brotherhoods and relationships with those people, and those are the memories that I look back and I'm so fond of, and so grateful for. And then FCW, I really there was hardships there too, but yeah, I look back at the friendships and some of the, God, Steve Kern and Dr. Tom and Norman Smiley and Billy Kidman, they were all great. Those were the coaches, like if you're looking for examples of what coaches should be, those are what coaches should be. And I was very happy to be under their leadership at FCW. And then you look at all the wrestlers that came up from there: Wade Barrett, Sheamus, Dolph Ziggler, all those guys. It's just like you wonder why, and that's why. And so, yeah, it's just, while I was in it, it was rough. Looking back, I'm appreciative of a lot of stuff.
If you could give advice to anybody getting into professional wrestling, what would it be?
I don't know, just learn a different language.
Yeah.
That was my advice. If I'd probably be a huge star in Mexico right now if I could just speak Spanish.
I just want
If
to
you want
go
yeah.
ahead. Go ahead.
Just if you want to, if you think about it, listen, I was able to wrestle. I've done, what is it, 30 tours of Japan. Like, imagine it. Like, look at I'm nowhere near Kenny Omega's skill, but or like look at Chris Brooks. Like, Chris Brooks lives over there now, and he speaks Japanese. So it's like, imagine what I could have done if I spoke Japanese. Or I've toured Mexico and Puerto Rico. Imagine the impact I could have had. So like, as an English speaker, I'm just I'm only allowed to like thrive in America, Australia, and the UK. But if you want to be a global phenomenon, um, I think it would have been such an advantage if I had picked up some of those languages.
I just want to thank you for coming on today. Thank you for what you've done for professional wrestling, what you continue to do. Thank you for starting the podcast craze that you did. It started with you. I will say that you really opened a lot of doors, I think, for people. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no, it was my pleasure. And again, the podcast saved my life and changed my life. And I had a vision. I knew what the vision was. I knew it would be successful. And I was just stupid enough to continue doing it without looking at numbers and just doing it like because I was enjoying it. Because at first it wasn't. I don't know what the numbers were, but I don't think they were that good. But I had built up a rapport with wrestling fans and wrestlers and people over the years that the wrestlers would do my show because they were my friends. And the wrestling fans had heard my name, and when they saw some big stars on there, they liked it, and then they kept for the other ones. And so I knew that plan would work. I just kept with it, and so I kept with it for a very long time, and I kept with wrestling for a very long time. So I think that's my fault, is I just keep with stuff for so long that eventually people jump on board. So I appreciate it.
Well, thank you for your time today. I greatly appreciate it. And if there's anything I can ever do, feel free to reach out.
Got it. You want my plugs?
Yeah, go ahead. Let's hear it.
Look at that. Look at that. Come on. You got to make me do my own.
I'm still learning. Where can people reach out to you at?
There you go. Listen, I'm at Colt Cabana on everything, but I do want to tell everybody about pwtlive.com, which is a live shopping experience every Tuesday night at 5:30 p.m. Central, Chicago time. That is through Pro Wrestling Tees. It's through Whatnot. It's called pwtlive.com. And like, there's just all these cool things. It's through AEW, Shop AEW too, which I'm with AEW, so it's just like a crazy shopping experience, but it's like an auction, so it's bing, 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 and it's really fun. Sometimes you get stuff super cheap, and it's pretty cool. And then twitch.tv/Colt Cabana. Come watch me play Fortnite.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. ColtMerch.com.
Thank you for your time today, sir. I greatly appreciate it. You're keeping the dream alive for a lot of people. I do feel like you are one of the most well-known professional wrestlers in the world, and that former WWE talent doesn't define you, and that's a testament to how good you are.
Well, I appreciate that. It means a lot.